So, what do you think? Which one of these should I choose here? Hello, it's so lovely to see you today. I hope you're doing well. Earlier today, when I was working on my collage house postcard, it occurred to me that that would be a really good subject for a textile collage as well. And I've been neglecting my Quilt As You Go hexes. And then I got a message on YouTube here from someone who asked whether I could show how I made the cottages in my garden scroll. Here you go. This is essentially what I did. So I started out with the light blue gingham checked fabric as the background, and that's going to be the sky. And then I added this dark green fabric as the ground so that my little cottage would have something to sit in and it wouldn't just be floating in midair. And I didn't want the lines to be straight. I wanted everything to be crooked about this. So I cut a curvy shape for the top off my ground here. And I'm just tacking it in place or basting it in place with large running stitches. And they may stay, they may not stay. They're pretty obvious in that light gray thread that I'm using, so I'm not sure that they're going to stay, but it doesn't really matter. And I kind of fooled you with that question at the beginning. I decided to use this little blue shape of cloth that came right out of the scrap bag, shaped like a house already. And that's pretty much what happened when I was doing the scroll as well. I pulled out a piece of cloth that looked like a house, and that's what I used. The blue house shape shows up really well against the light background, but not so well against the dark green at the bottom there. So I've got this other little piece of cloth that works really well to create a little garden and allows my house there to show up. And then I decided that my piece needed a sun. I just pulled these out of the scrap bag that somebody gave me, and isn't that a perfect piece of cloth to be the sun? I'm just attaching them to the background so that they don't move around, and I don't really like to use pins because they all get in the way. And there you go. I decided that I don't want my house to be quite so straight, and it was a little bit too big to sit comfortably in my little light green garden there, so I trimmed off some of the edges so that they were a little bit less straight. They're a bit crooked now. It's a crooked little cottage. And everything is just getting basted down at this point, and I don't really have a plan. I don't know what this is going to look like or what direction it's going to go. I have some thoughts, but I don't really know. So everything's stuck down now, and now I'm thinking, I think I'd like to do a roof line. And I thought about that bright red one, but I didn't think I wanted it to be that bold and bright. So I've got this other cloth, which is perfect because those stripes and the pattern in the cloth really reminds me of a roof ridge line. So I'm going to now tack that down. And I'm only going to tack down along the bottom edge because you may have noticed there's that little tuft at the top of my house shape there that's making me think of a chimney. And I don't think it's quite bold enough for a chimney, but I think I do want to add a chimney. I am thinking ahead a little bit, so I don't want to sew this roof line down at the top edge until I decide whether I'm going to put a chimney up there or not. I want to be able to tuck it in behind so it's not just sitting on the surface of the roof. And I've got a little bit more thread left over here, so I didn't finish sewing down my house, tacking down my house the first time around, so I'm going to use that thread to finish it. And that red cloth that I was thinking about, I think that would just make a fine front door. It shows up really well, so that's what I'm going to do next. Still a little bit of thread left there, and I'll tack down that front door. And this is just how I make my decisions one at a time. So the front door is tacked down, and now you might recognize that little plaid piece that I have there. And I cut it out strategically because those light areas in the plaid with the crisscross lines through it really felt like they needed to be windows. So I cut out two little windows, and I've sewn them on very crooked. It is a crooked house after all. And that was my next decision done. And now, so if I cut out that cloth in a different area, it looks very different. That part looks quite different than the part that I use for the windows, and that's what I'm going to use for the chimney. And it's going to be a crooked chimney, like just like everything else. Just to keep reminding me that perfection is overrated and it doesn't matter. Nothing has to be perfect. If I make everything crooked, then nothing stands out as being wrong or or less precise. So, now I could pretty much stop here if I wanted to. I could just tidy things up a little bit, maybe change some of those tacking threads to something that blends in a little bit better, but I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm going to add more stitching because I actually enjoy the stitching process. I don't find it tedious. I don't find it boring. I actually quite like just sitting and stitching and thinking about what I'm going to do next. And the next thing that I decided is that I'm going to make a little fence around my garden here. I'm doing that with quite a bold thread, and it's a little tricky to pull it through. It doesn't come through quite so easily because keep in mind I'm going through about 3 layers of cloth and the batting at the back of this piece here. And I'm doing some imperfectly straight lines. They go back and forth, but they all sort of point vaguely straight up, and that looks like a fence around my garden. And now with a very thin thread, I am sewing those long stitches down and adding the cross beams across my fence there. And then the next thing I decided that I felt like I wanted to do was to make a path from the front door to the gap in the fence, which I left for a gate intentionally. I did plan that. I almost forgot and then I remembered, so it's off to one side, which is good. You know, nothing straight. And I'm just going back and forth with a stem stitch as many times as I need to. And I'm not really worried about whether it's perfect or whether there are any gaps that let the cloth show through. I can go back in and fill them in later on. And I'll just keep going until I like the shape and the width off the path there. And I can change colors if I want. I don't have to do the same thread color. And I decided that the gray that I'd used to tack the green part in place would be a good color to add there. I don't know why, it doesn't matter. Just the decision that I made. I felt like that green piece of cloth is sewn down well enough that it's not going to go anywhere. And now I could decide that I wanted to stop here. But I didn't. I decided that I'm going to put some wildflowers in the field out there beyond the garden of the house, and I started out by making a few French knots for small flowers near the top, which reads as being further away, and as we come closer to the bottom, that reads as being closer. So I made some larger flowers using what's called a lazy daisy stitch. It's a series of detached chain stitches that go around in a circle that all start off at the same point in the middle and then work their way around to make a flower or daisy-like shape. And as I mentioned, I'm going to make a few of those sort of lower down on my piece here so that they look like they're closer. And now there's more flowers that have been added. And then I started doing some little straight stitches, some just seed stitches to further secure that piece of cloth down, but also look like little tufts of grass, but they weren't showing up very much, so I stopped after a while. And I'm using that same color thread to create a vine growing up the side of my house, and against that light color background, those stitches show up a lot more. And now I've gone to a lighter green thread against the dark color background, so those stitches show up quite well against the dark background. And now there's lots more stitching down in that field area. Now I could decide to stop now. Do you think I'm going to? No, I decided to do something else. I thought that this rickrack, this type of ribbon is called rickrack, this wavy ribbon. I thought that that looks a lot like house roof tiles. So it could be shingles or some sort of corrugated roof there. So I'm going to sew that on along the top ridge of my house. And now that will secure everything in place there. And the nice thing about this type of ribbon is that when you sew it down from the inside edge to the inside edge of the point, it creates a really nice sort of additional pattern. And this type of ribbon can take quite sharp corners, so I don't have to cut it at the roof line. I just fiddle around with it and turn it around and then just go down the other side. And I quite like the way it looks. Now, this one is a variegated color. It was specially dyed by a local dyer. I bought it for my daughter's Christmas present, but then I kept a bit for myself. And I really like it, but it comes in different widths, and it's a really fun bit of trim to add an extra design element to my piece here. Now I've still got some thread, so usually what I do when I have extra thread left over after I've finished doing something is I look at where else can I use it. So I'm just doing some rows back and forth along that roof ridge. I don't know what it's called, a facing fascia, something like that, that you have in front of your roof line. And now I could decide I was finished now, but no, I'm going to add more. I decided that that field looked a little empty there underneath the sun. And you may notice now that I've added some rays coming out of the sun, sort of emanating out from the sun, much like a child would draw a sun. And really this whole piece is a lot like a child's drawing. You know, I remember I used to draw houses a lot when I was a child, and just really simple shapes, and that's really all I've done here. The sophistication comes from all the stitching that I've added on the top. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding some little birds, some little fly stitch birds, a flock of birds flying in the sky here. And I'm using several strands and varying the direction. They're not all flying in exactly the same direction. They're all kind of going this way and that way. Some of them are closer together, some of them are further apart. And that's what random means. Random means that things are sometimes closer together and sometimes further apart. Some of them appear to be flying in front of the sun, a little bit like Icarus and Daedalus, but not really. They're a long way from the sun. No chance of their wings melting. And now I have switched over to a thinner thread, one strand of thread, so I can make some smaller little birds that look like they're further away. So just adding more depth and perspective to my piece. Now surely I'm done. Well, no. So I decided I needed some more plants over on that side underneath the sun there. And again, I'm using the same stitch that I used to create the birds, but I'm stacking the fly stitches one on top of the other, so it looks like a little pine tree or some sort of little shrub. And I thought my little shrub there was looking a little bare, so I decided to go over it again because I can do whatever I want. And there you go. I've added a few more little plants along the horizon line. What do you think? I think it might be finished now. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching once again. It was lovely to have you here, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye for now.